Good afternoon, Lampa. So today is Saturday the 5th of March 2022. And I was wondering if you could talk about desire as it is in the Second Noble Truth.
Desire, we live in a desire realm. And so when you contemplate the world that we experience through the senses, it's all about desire. So I mean, it's a natural condition that we identify with in a personal way. So we have good desires and bad desires. And then sometimes Buddhism sounds like we've got to get rid of desires. So I remember when I first encountered Buddhism, I assumed that one had to get rid of desires because it seemed like the English word desire was always connected to sexual desire or desire for power and wealth and things like this. So in the samana life, the monastic life that I was dedicating my life to, I assumed that I had to get rid of desire. But then in the reflective qualities of Buddhist teaching, when you're contemplating and understanding the First Noble Truth of suffering, then you see how the attachment to desire is what is the cause of suffering. This ignorant attachment to desires. It's not the desires in themselves, but it's not trying to get rid of them or substitute only good desires and get rid of bad desires, because that we can't do. That's not the way things are in terms of experience. So in the Second Noble Truth, the investigation of desire, and I found this very helpful in my first year as a samanera, just understanding that desire doesn't necessarily anything like just something negative or something bad that we've got to get rid of, but is to understand it, because we're actually living in a desire form. The form that I would identify with is a desire body, is produced through desire. It's the natural condition produced through sexual intercourse that is sustained through food. We have to, in the early years, my mother had to feed me, and then, most of my life is the need for nourishment, food. And that's just natural. That's not like, if we take it personally, we make it in some kind of personal problem, when it's not. And like, it's natural to get hungry. You don't choose it. It's just the way the body needs to survive. It needs to be fed. And the body itself is food. So this identification with food is, because of ignorance, and we don't reflect or contemplate the nature of it. We merely operate from given positions that we acquired when we were innocent children, that this body is what I am, and that good boys act like this, and if you act in the opposite way, you're a bad boy. So you're trying to, you realize to appease, to make your life comfortable in the family you're born into. If you obey mother and father, you get rewarded, usually, and if you disobey them, you get punished. So you develop a sense of survival, a natural sense of survival, because this realm is about survival. We have to eat, we procreate the species, and we have to survive in daily life, just by nourishment, by shelter, by place to live, by protecting ourselves against the weather. And then there's all the environmental conditions that affect us in positive or negative ways. So the basic human condition is one of desire for nourishment, for survival, for procreation. And out of ignorance of Dhamma, when we're just merely conditioned to operate according to cultural biases, cultural conditions, social identities, racial identities, gender identities, then we operate from a system that is, we acquire, it's not natural, it's an acquisition, and so we identify with these desires, and like being a celibate monk, you're forbidden to have any form of sexual activity, and so then one can see how one's conditioned to regard, like even sexual thoughts as dirty and evil, and because that's how one is conditioned in modern life, at least I was, my generation. And then the second noble truth breaks down desire into three categories, which is very helpful to consider. So there's kama tanha, or sensual desire, which is quite obvious. Like right now, it's turning to spring here in England, and you can see the snowdrops and the daffodils appearing, and you want to look at them because they're beautiful. And today was a very rainy, cloudy day, and where it didn't draw you out, where on a sunny day, where we live in England is very beautiful. So you like to gaze out the window or go for walks and enjoy what you see, because the sun, improves the colors of the flowers, and the green on the trees and the lawns and so forth. So this is natural, just to appreciate, what is beautiful and what is not beautiful that we encounter through sight. We tend to resist or ignore. So just sensual desire is the first form of desire mentioned in the second noble truth. Then the second is bhava tanha. Now what does that mean? It's a desire for becoming. So that can be noble kind of desire. It's like desire to get enlightened is bhava tanha. I, Sumedho, want to become enlightened is a rather noble desire, and wanting to get. And then the third category is vipavadana, our desire to annihilate or get rid of what we don't like, and then the desire to get rid of desire is vipavadana. So by reflecting on these three categories, you begin to see tanha, or desire, as something that is conditioned. It arises and ceases. You aren't permanently in a state of desire. And that aspirations toward becoming an arahant or a Buddha or a bodhisattva, these are noble aspirations, but they're very, so they're noble, so they're good, but they are a form of desire which comes and goes and is created by your mind. And Vipavadana, the desire to annihilate, get rid of, is, wanting to get rid of defilements, of wanting to get rid of jealousy, of fear. And one can see want to get rid of anger. People on retreats often consult me about how to get rid of anger. And the desire to get rid of anger is what we call vipavadana, desire to get rid of something you have that you don't want. So then one takes the desire, three forms of desire, and observes them as they happen in your daily life. And so in my experience with that, then the structure that we live by is called Vinaya, which is we call the precepts about proper behavior, right speech, right action, right livelihood. So these precepts are, highly regarded in this tradition. So they limit you in terms of action and speech. So you commit yourself to the restraint of the Vinaya, or this traditional form of restraint, monastic restraint. And then you can observe, it gives you a vehicle in terms of behavior and one's speech habits to reflect on them as we live in a community life of Sangha, or a community of monastics. So in Thailand, they often, some of the Ajahns talk about killing your defilements. And so this is how sometimes it's interpreted even in Thailand. To kill is a rather violent act to annihilate defilements. And so on a logical level, it seems, reasonable. So in terms of killing defilements, it is, in terms of vipavadana and killing defilements, you begin to see that very act of trying to get rid of them, or suppress them, or resist them, is the form of desire, negative, wanting to get rid of what you don't want. Where the Buddha actually means to understand desire, to understand suffering, then you must understand desire. The realm that we live in is a desire realm. So even in monastic life, where you're living in a very restricted way, a celibate life, you still have these desires that are natural to the human state on planet Earth, and that you don't necessarily create them out of intention, but they happen according to conditions. So vipavadana, I found, because that was a total new way of looking at desire that I really related to, because I could see so much of my life had been in this kind of effort to control things, to get rid of fear, to get rid of self-consciousness, to get rid of anger, to get rid of greed. I didn't want to be greedy. And to get rid of jealousy. I didn't like jealousy. I didn't want to be jealous. And so in lay life, so much of my problems with guilt were around being jealous, or about anger or resentment or fear. Like the American role model for my generation was a real man isn't afraid of anything. But fear is when you begin to understand fear, it's a natural kind of survival mechanism, because in planetary life, just the human body, wherever it might be, in the city or the jungle, there's a lot to fear, just naturally, without it becoming some kind of neurotic fear. And it's the kind of behavioral protective emotion. And you can see it all around you, like here at the monastery at Amravati, just watching the squirrels and the birds, the magpies and the blackbirds, spend their whole day looking for food. And that's natural. They have to spend their life looking for food and for surviving. So they're very alert to any possible danger that might come into the garden while they are looking for food. And it's instinctual. They don't choose to be frightened. Or it's not greed that they looking for food. It's necessary, just natural product of this material form, this food form that has to survive on other material and protect itself from external dangers. So when you see that it's very natural to be afraid and to get angry, and sexual desire is natural, and that these conditions are seen in very personal terms, this is why we suffer from them, because we see these natural emotional conditions as in personal attitudes of right, wrong, good and bad, true and false. And then then so many in Western life, there's so much problem with guilt, feeling of guilt, because of, the fact that we are ashamed sometimes or embarrassed by our animal bodies, by our need for food or sexual experience or fear or jealousy, because ideally, even in modern society, you look down on when you look at dramas or Hollywood movies where jealousy is visualized on the screen, you don't want to have that. You don't want to be like that. You don't want to be a man that's frightened of everything, or a man that's obsessed with sexual intercourse. If your ideals are about being pure at heart and good and generous and brave and fearless, then all you can do is feel guilty when these very natural emotions arise. Where the Buddha in his teaching was encouraging us to understand these emotions. So Buddha Dhamma is all about investigating and finding out for yourself, not just adopting some kind of role of I'm not afraid of anything, which is a lie, because there's a lot to be afraid of. Or to pretend you've never had dirty thoughts in your life, or that you don't have them now as a monk, that you shouldn't, you feel guilty about it. Where when you begin to observe desire for what it is, you're putting it in a neutral form that's impersonal, in which you understand it, you observe, it's something that arises and ceases, that is according to conditions that change. And the conditioned realm is the experience of change, like the body, the what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, what we think, our emotions are very changeable. They're changing all the time. The planet is changing, the sun, moon, and stars are changing. There's all an endless movement, arising and ceasing, beginning and ending, that we tend to not really understand and build a lot of ideals about how we'd like to find permanent stability and safety in a changing world. So, utopian idealism is created in the mind of, the perfect society where everything is ideal and perfect, and where everybody gets along and there's, shares their wealth, and there's no rich or poor, men and women are equal and everything's fair and everybody's happy is a beautiful ideal, not to despise it, but an ideal, if attached to blindly out of ignorance, is going to lead us to despair, because the life that we're experiencing through these forms, through these bodies and the senses, isn't ideal. And the Buddha, in his teachings, was pointed very precisely to the way things are, which are never, life has its peak moments where everything can seem perfect, where you've got everything you want and the weather's good and your relationships with others are wonderful and all like that. So we have peak moments in life. But just try to sustain peak moments of worldly life, and it ends up with despair. You can't do it. When it reaches a peak, it means it's at its very best. It's going to change, and it can't get better than the best, or it can't go higher than the peak. So it goes the other way. And it's through understanding this, how progress and regress are codependent, and birth is the cause of death. When we want, many people want to conquer death and have an eternal, stable life in a human form that never dies. And that's really ridiculous when you think of it. Living forever in a human form, living in the sensory world with all its dangers and changes that are beyond control, that we have no ability to manipulate and control in any way. What do? So when you contemplate or reflect on the way it is, then you begin to accept, you let go of these desires. You don't get rid of them. You're not like trying to suppress them or resist them anymore, but you realize that attachment to these desires is the very cause of suffering.
So practically speaking, what does it mean to let go of desire without getting rid of it?
Well, to let go of a desire, you have to understand it. Because if you're just trying to let go out of aversion, that's Vipawadana, desire to get rid of something you don't want. So it really, letting go isn't about rejecting or throwing away or annihilating, but understanding that by this blind attachment, this habitual conditioned attachment to these desires, that is the very cause of our suffering, for our anxiety, for our worry, for all our fears, rational, irrational, justified or unjustified. This realm that we experience in these forms is, quite dangerous. And that's, when you see that, then, and you take it personally, then you feel this sense of fear, with all these predictions of climate change and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and droughts and floods and meteors coming from outer space or alien invasions, all the possible things you can imagine or are happening to us at this time when our whole identity is with the forms that are very vulnerable and easily destroyed, then one is going to spend one's life worried and anxious and upset by things we have no ability to control.
So would it be correct to say that learning to let go of desire and understand it, in a way means to be able to understand it, we have to be willing to endure desire while it's present so we can understand it? Is that
exactly.
correct?
You have to understand isn't intellectual. It's not about why do I suffer.
Mm-hmm.
I try to analyze the causes of my suffering with my intellect. Is my suffering due to my parental experience or my social position or, whatever, because my nose is too big or my eyes are too small. Or being abused by others and bullied and so forth. One can trace all kinds of causes through memory of being abused or treated unfairly. Everybody has these memories, and but that's not what we're interested in. We don't need to know why we suffer. It's learning to understand it. To understand it, you have to really accept it, welcome suffering. It's more like accepting it is like this, and patiently witnessing it. Even the desire to get rid of it, because, like physical discomfort and physical pain, automatically we want to get rid of it. It's just natural. We don't like physical pain. And when it happens, the immediate reaction is how to get rid of it, how to get rid of the pain. And so that's just a natural reaction. That isn't cultural or personal. Because pain is unpleasant and don't want it. And physical pleasure is what we want, what is desirable, what is comfortable, what is beautiful. So it's understanding means patiently enduring. It takes patience to not just be caught in first automatic reactions, habitual reactions to experience, but to observe them. To be the witness. It's this, when we talk about reflection or witnessing, it's not judgmental. Like what I refer to as intuitive awareness or consciousness is not a judgmental thing. When we judge our desires and try to figure out why I suffer and who to blame for it, we're making value judgments about ourselves or about our families or our society, about our politicians, about the climate. We're thinking about how I wasn't born in a perfect condition and with perfect parents and perfect society, so therefore it's the society's fault, my parents' fault. It becomes absurd when you really think it out to absurdity. But when you observe the suffering of, how do we choose our parents? Do we choose our social position? When we find ourselves born into this family and it's like this. Did you actually remember choosing to be born into a dysfunctional family, or did that just happen? As far as I know, as far as I can witness, I didn't choose the family. I was born in the family I was born into was merely, circumstances that I had no knowledge of. So I can't, I can imagine a perfect family and a utopian society, but families, whatever they are, whether they're very nourishing, wonderful, loving, helpful, wise parents, or they're dysfunctional and neurotic, alcoholic and screwed up, these are not really the causes of suffering in terms of Dhamma. So, it's learning to take suffering and observe it, and you see its suffering is impermanent. If you just react to it by resisting it, trying to get rid of it or blame it on somebody else, you never understand it. You just develop a habit of the same reactions throughout your whole life. So if you live 500 years, you're going to spend 500 years blaming your mother or father, unless you understand suffering, that this realm of sensory experience, its very nature, is unsatisfactory. And that's just the way it is. There's nothing wrong with it. And then we can blame God for not creating a perfect society, where everything is perfect and beautiful. So we use God as a scapegoat. We become atheists or anti-theists, because we think, God, according to our conditioning, can seem like, somebody who created all this, and why did he create pain? Why did he create all these survival problems and planetary life with all its unknown potentials for dramatic changes that we can't even understand or foresee? Is it God's fault, or is it just the way things are, that this realm of desire, of suffering, is like this? And then this kind of insight, this is an insight, you realize for yourself, to let go is to relax with it. It's not about trying to just hide away from it, because you can't really do that. But if you relax with life and observe it from this awareness, sati sampajanya, or conscious awareness in the present, then we begin to understand and have profound insight into the way things are, in which we don't create suffering anymore. Once we have that insight into letting go of the causes of suffering, letting go of desire doesn't mean we never have any more desires. It just means that for the rest of our life we're aware of the cause of suffering is grasping these desires, blindly grasping these desires.
So it's a question of being aware of desire arising, letting it do what it does, and allowing it to cease without interfering. Is that correct?
Well, it means like you're developing wisdom to determine how to act or not act. Like desire to help the poor is a good desire. So you can, but your grasping of that desire isn't out of ignorance anymore, it's out of wisdom. Where wanting to help the poor just out of ignorance can be, very frustrating, because, what can I do for the poor and the starving and the situation in Ukraine and so forth, and as a person, is, it seems, it's a good desire to want to help and solve the issues. And with ignorance, then one just feels kind of helpless or hopeless with so many experiences that we have to experience, that we have in our lifetime. But if we understand desire, then the desire to help the poor is what we do with our lives. What is how we use our physical forms, our bodies, how we can encourage people to meditate, to develop wisdom is a good desire. So we can, when it's not coming from personal wishes to enlighten everybody and out of ignorance, we see this as a personal ambition. It's still a good personal ambition, but it's still going to cause you suffering until you see that letting go of that desire doesn't mean you don't do anything. It means you can do something, what you can do. You're not overestimating your abilities or underestimating your abilities in the present situation. So right action is through wisdom. Right speech is through wisdom. Right livelihood is through wisdom. Not through some kind of personal desire to have right speech, right action, right livelihood.
Is it that same wisdom that helps us distinguish between what we call desire and chanda, aspiration, like spiritual aspiration?
Well, if you're personally attached to chanda, it does help, even out of ignorance, to attach to aspiration. But that aspiration has to lead to wisdom. So just having aspirations for enlightenment might be very praiseworthy, but also if we don't investigate this realm that we're experiencing with wisdom, then we're going to be disappointed, because the illusion of a separate self, of a separate personality, and a separate soul is an illusion that if we don't see through, if we never investigate it, then we're caught into the natural judgmental habits of thinking. We can't help it. But when we see through that, then the flow of our life comes through wisdom, through understanding, and in these Buddhist terms, understanding the Four Noble Truths. Because the third Noble Truth is the end of suffering. So suffering doesn't mean, like, when you have insight into the end of suffering, that you don't have any more suffering. It means suffering is part of just growing old, getting sick and die, losing your family, and separation from the love. These can still be experienced, but they're not grasped in personal, habitual ways. So we can transcend the suffering and learn from it through wisdom. And even if we still experience all kinds of blame and criticism and disappointments in worldly terms, or political changes or climate changes, and that we're not going to create suffering around the way things are. And then with right action, we do what we can to ameliorate the situation, to solve the problem. But there's wisdom there, so it's not taken personally. That if there's nothing one can do, then there's nothing one can do. That's the way it is. And you find your real liberation is in the Third Noble Truth, in the end of suffering. When you see that in your own experience, that you actually can witness the end of suffering, because it does cease. And it's through this insight into the cessation of suffering that you begin to realize non-suffering is your true nature. Or pure consciousness. Consciousness doesn't suffer. Just this consciousness that we're experiencing through the senses, we create suffering around what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and think. But consciousness itself, that transcends just the limitation of senses, of eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, that transcends that, doesn't suffer. Is natural, is what we call Dhamma, ultimate reality. Or in Christian mysticism it would be called God, I hope. And whatever you want to call it, because it's nameless. Ultimate reality or Dhamma, you can't describe it or find it as an object. So, but you can know it because that's what you really are, your true nature. And this is like the gate to the deathless, is this through this conscious awareness, mindfulness, that has become such a in word at this present time. People are really, taking an interest in looking into the way things are, rather than trying to solve every problem and create endless more problems through sometimes good intentions. So Chanda is skillful, but also Chanda for me was trusting in the Four Noble Truths, the basic teaching, the first sermon of the Buddha. Because I realized that with all my high-minded aspirations, I felt, a total slave to my habits. I was, enslaved to really thinking in negative ways and so limited in terms of my emotional habits. So, there was, so the aspiration, the Chanda, was like a blessing. It's grace that we're experiencing from the universe to aspire to enlightenment or to whatever you want to call it. Liberation, freedom, the words don't really matter that much. But in terms of the aspiration, leads you through skillful means to make that possible. So my faith, my trust in the Buddhist teaching it wasn't a kind of just blind belief in it. It wasn't just adopting new beliefs that are called Buddhist in exchange for Christian ones. It was because of the practical aspects of investigation, of finding out for yourself the way things are.
Thank you very much, Sumedho.